This is a flat-felled seam. It is a strong method of joining fabric so that the raw edges are enclosed within the seam and the seam lies flat against the body and garment. To make this seam, place the fabric wrong sides together. Slide the top piece to the left. I'm eyeballing a 1 cm difference. This difference will be the width of the finished seam, so adjust this to the needs of your project. Fold the edge of the bottom panel over and edge stitch along the raw edge. Open up your fabric and push the side seam over to cover the raw edge, then flip to the right side. Edge stitch to the left of the fold. Flip back to the wrong side and edge stitch the open side of the seam. And you're finished. For longer runs of stitching, you will likely want to take a bit more time preparing. When adding seam allowance to your patterns, you need to decide which panel will be the top side of the seam and which will go underneath. On the top side panel, add the width you want for your finished seam, in this case 1 cm. On the wrong side of the underside panel, mark a fold line at 1 cm from the pattern's edge and the cut line 2 cm from the pattern edge. The important thing to remember is that you want to give the underside double the amount of seam allowance as the top side. Take the underside panel, right side up, and press the seam allowance over on the fold line. Then slide the top side panel, right sides together, under the fold and pin in place. You can then sew as before. First, edge stitch along the raw edge. Open out your garment and press the seam over to cover the raw edge. If you feel the need, flip over to the right side and pin the seam in place. Then, with the garment right side up, top stitch along the top side edge. Finally, on the wrong side, edge stitch along the free edge of the seam. If you have a twin needle, use this at the top stitching stage to give perfectly parallel lines. Let the size of your twin needle define the width of your seam, adding a couple of millimeters to the gap between the two needles for tolerance. If you've never used a twin needle before, you can watch my complete guide to twin needles linked in the iCard. The flat-felled seam is a fairly bulky bit of stitching. There may be times where you want this look, but the seam doesn't need to be particularly strong, and ideally a little thinner and flexible. Try this method. Place your panels wrong sides together. Then stitch double the width you want your final seam to be from the raw edge. Open out the seam and trim down one side, then fold the longer seam allowance over the raw edge and edge stitch the seam into place. You can see one side captures 3 or 4 layers of the fabric, depending on the amount you have trimmed for your seam allowance, while the other only captures 2, so this looks far stronger than it actually is. Flat-felled seams are commonly found on denim garments and men's shirts. They are incredibly strong, hard-wearing, but bulky. One final thing, I'm not sure that flat-felled seam is the correct name for this, as there isn't a felled stitch to be found. A felled stitch is a short hand stitch at an angle to the garment edge. And a proper flat-felled seam is a hand stitch join using a felled stitch to hold the open edge of the finished seam flat. Regardless of what it should be called, this is a very useful seam. Why not try it on your next project? Find more sewing content on the Unpicker, and if this was useful, why not subscribe?